Fear not. Behold, I bring you good news of a Messiah. Ye shall find the babe. By logging on, just go to the church website. But also, you can come to the Christmas Eve services. That we will be, safe and everything. Yeah, we're just social distancing, just trying to take care of each other. Social distancing.
Why are you still standing there? Grab your laptop and log on, or head to the church if that's your preference, and celebrate the birth of Jesus.
I'll socially distance, but I'm going to church. I'm gonna go to my mom's house. She's got the fastest internet in town.
Life in a small town can border on boring. Every day the same as the last. Even Christmas can seem like every Christmas before. And then, out of the blue, like the star of Bethlehem, something unexpected happens. A stranger comes to town, a secret comes to light, and a small town has never felt so small. And then Christmas catches you by surprise all over again.
Well, there are just a few announcements before we get into this evening's message. First of all, Community Book Exchange. We just had our last one of the year this Saturday, pretty successful. Lots of people coming in, a lot of books going in and out. So our next one will be January 16th. So that's what our plans are right now, January 16th. Also, Prayer Walk for January will be January 11th, so that's Monday. And remember, we're starting at 5, not 5:30 like we have in the past. Couple of ways for you to give this season, if you're looking for ideas and ways to give. First of all, you can give locally through the Habitat for Humanity. On our entrance table in there, there's these cute little house banks, and they come with an advent calendar, and it's just a way for you to, creative ways for you to save some money up and donate to our local Habitat for Humanity, so Chaffey County Habitat for Humanity. And then internationally, a great way for you to give is through Compassion International. It's a group, a charity foundation that's close to our hearts. We have adopted 3 children through them that we take care of every month financially. And those things financially takes care of books and Bibles and school and different things like that for them. But if you can't give monthly or basically support a child monthly, there's a great way. Also, when you came in on your right, there's a little tree there that has these nifty little ornaments on it. And they give you options to give from $10 all the way up to $200. $10 is Bibles, supplies Bibles for children in that area, all the way up to $200 which supplies animals so that they can sustain their home and things like that. But there's $25 for immunizations, just lots of great levels there for you to give. So please make sure you pick a way to do that and do so. Our weekly prayer this week, our church to be praying for is St. Rose, the Catholic Church here in town. So please be praying for them. And then the businesses here in town this week to be praying for is CKS Main Street, Kayak Supply, the View Cafe and Gifts, Rustic Woods, and Gone to the Dogs. So those are our 4 businesses. So St. Rose Catholic Church, CKS Main Street, the View Cafe and Gifts, Rustic Woods, and Gone to the Dogs. So now let's get into what really we all came for to watch and see what Velma and her crew are up to.
Previously on Velmas.
A poster in the window is more than enough from you people. More than enough from you people. We'll show that out to Grace Memorial Church. As you know, I have decided to put on a Christmas pageant of our very own right here in the diner.
Like we're gonna be able to find 3 wise men around here.
It's like easier than finding a
Henry!
Who's gonna play the parts?
I thought the angel could be played by Nadine.
Oh, so it's a comedy.
I can't play an angel. I'll be the laughing stock of the entire county.
But I'm real good with animals, and Staples have animals.
Now, I'm still waiting for the good Lord to bring my Mary along. I'm gonna have to wait for her. Sugar, we are on a tight budget, so we're just gonna have to make do. Now, speaking of Nadine, have you seen her?
Yeah, she's in the back, but she's too embarrassed to come out.
Nonsense. Nadine, get your behind out here.
The first person who makes a joke gets punched.
I can't believe it.
Didn't think she could look that good, did you, Henry?
No, I can't believe we were all struck by lightning.
That's it. I'm out of here.
No, now, wait a second. You're my angel, and nothing and no one can change that. Now, speaking of, mister, when am I going to get my staple?
Well, I guess you'll be stable once you get your medication right. Look, I can't get into the center until tonight. It'll be ready. Stop your worrying.
And honey, those locker rooms smell like a stable, so we're gonna have to get everybody ready over here and then head over once it's showtime.
Well, that's the least of my worries. I'm still waiting on my Mary to appear.
So,
saw on the Discovery Channel where Mary appeared in the bark of a 100-year-old oak tree.
Not that kind of appearance, buddy. I'm waiting on the right girl to come along.
Well, I've been waiting for 67 years.
Velma, tomorrow night is Christmas Eve. Don't you think you ought to just pick somebody to play Mary and get on with it?
You can't just pick someone to play Mary. First of all, she can't be married. And second of all, she can't be too young or too old. I'm guessing about 20 would be about right. Now look, I know it sounds crazy, but Mary's got to be special. What about her? She looks about right. I can't ask a total stranger to play Mary.
Well, if you don't know who's gonna play her, she'll have to be a stranger now, won't she?
Well, you've got a point, but she's not the one. How do you know? I can tell by looking at her. Well, I can. I have a sense about these things.
My mama, she had a scent about her. I think it was Lysol. And
Not a sense, buddy. A sense.
Well, you're never gonna know unless you talk to her.
Well, I don't have to talk to her because I know she's not the one. But if it'll make y'all happy, I will. Hey there, darling. Can I get you anything else? Some more coffee?
Decaf. I can't have caffeine.
Does it make you jumpy?
No, but it's not good for my baby.
Oh, you're pregnant. How nice. So, are you and your husband from around here?
I'm not married.
Oh, really?
I am engaged, though.
Oh, well, that's nice. Will you excuse me a moment? Well, I guess that answers that.
Yeah, she's perfect.
Perfectly wrong. What do you mean? She's pregnant, but not married. I'm sorry, but I just don't see Mary that way.
Well, I don't mean to state the obvious, but wasn't Mary pregnant but not married?
It's not the same, Henry, and she's not the one. Mary's got to be special and better than everyone else.
Ma, don't you sound just like you're from the Fountain of Grace Memorial Church?
This is different. Now, I've got nothing against this girl as long as she loves that baby and does what's best for it. But this is Mary, and she's just not the right girl.
You mean the right kind of girl, don't you?
So, are you just passing through?
Yes, but my car broke down.
Oh, where's this fiancé of yours?
He's overseas. He's in the army and he got called in the Gulf. I call him my G.I. Joey. That's his name, Joey. Well, really Joseph.
What's your name, darling?
Cat.
Cat? Like cats and dogs?
No, K-A-T. It's short for Catherine. Actually, that's short for Mary Catherine.
Oh, you're 20 years old, aren't you, Mary Catherine, fiancée of G.I. Joseph?
Yeah, how'd you know?
I have a sense about these things.
And I bet you have no place to lay your head tonight.
Actually, no, but I'm not staying with you.
No, you're not, because you're staying with me. My name is Velma, and I own this place. Now look, sugar, I'm gonna feed you and I'm gonna get your vehicle fixed. And in exchange, you're gonna be my Mary in our little nativity scene tomorrow night.
That sounds great, but no thank you.
What do you mean, no thank you?
Look, you all seem like very nice people, but the fact of the matter is that you don't know me.
Honey, I know you better than you think. And even though I hate to admit it, you're my Mary.
No, I'm not. Like I said, you don't know me or where I've been.
Look, sugar, I've been down that road and let me tell you, it's as dead as a three-legged dog trying to cross the interstate.
So what makes you so sure I'm the one?
she smelled it.
Come on, darling, let's get you a bathrobe. Take this for me, please.
Well, Velma and her crew's story just keeps getting better and better, doesn't it? I can't wait to see how that all ends and wraps up for us, and we will see that Thursday on Christmas Eve for our Christmas Eve service here at 5 o'clock. So make sure you're here for that, or that you are tuned in online so you can see that then. If you have been following along, you know that we have been talking about the Christmas story. But it's been through Matthew's interpretation. And Matthew, he started not with the story of angels in a manger, but instead he started with Jesus' genealogy. And I don't know if you're much into genealogy. A few years ago, my cousin decided that she was going to create this massive family tree and go back and research all the people that we are related to. And at first I was kind of excited, but as she got more into it, it just seemed really, really daunting. I mean, it's a lot of work. And then I started thinking about how dangerous that really could be. You know, looking back and researching people you don't know can really open up a can of worms. Maybe you luck out and you find out you're related to someone famous. But there's also a chance for the flip side, isn't there? You could find that you're related to Jeffrey Dahmer or someone like that. In which case, you don't bring that up at the company Christmas party, do you? That one you just keep quiet on your list. But generally, you are looking for cool people, like generals and famous women and politicians and people who did things, inventors, people who wrote music. You're looking for the good things when you do that kind of research. As we said from the beginning of this series, when Matthew sat down to give his account of the life of Jesus, instead of beginning with a story about the baby in Bethlehem and an angel and all of those really cool things that we find in Luke and some that we find later in Matthew, Matthew begins by doing a little research. He begins with the genealogy. His goal was to prove to his Jewish audience that Jesus was related, first of all, to Abraham, which made him a Jew, right? But secondly, that he was in the lineage of King David. Because everybody knew in that culture that the Messiah, and he was going to call him Jesus the Messiah, everyone knew that the Messiah was related, in fact, to David. So he goes all the way back to Abraham, and he traces his way through all these different people, all the way up to King David, all the way to Jesus to make his point. Now, the point of the genealogy is to say, hey, Jesus is legit, right? He is related to the right people. But as we discovered, he does something a bit odd. Not only does Matthew underscore the right people, King David, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all those, but he also underscores some of the R-rated characters of Jesus' past. He underscores some of the people that we would likely skip over when we were telling our family story, genealogy. We'd leave those people out, or hope that nobody finds out about them. There are 4 women in this list of all men, and 3 of these women aren't even Jewish, which means that Jesus didn't have a pure Jewish bloodline. Why would he point that out? As we saw last week, there were a couple of these people in Jesus' lineage that had really, really crazy backgrounds and did some just awful things, right? And again, as you read, he seems to just stop and pause and force his audience's attention to those people. We've asked the question, why would Matthew do that? Why are those people included? And the reason they're included, we've said, is that they're part of the story. But more importantly, they're the point of the story. Matthew was writing to a very, very religious group of people. A very, very religious environment that believed that in order to have right standing with God, you came to God based on the things that you had done and the things that you had not done. In fact, all world religions essentially embrace this approach to God. God, I'm coming before you today, and I need you to bless my babies. I need you to bless my crops. I need you to bless my business. And the reason that you should take me seriously, God, is because here are some good things I've done. Here are some bad things I've avoided. Here are some things I've quit doing. And here are some things that I've never done. And I'm not as good as some people, God, but I'm not as bad as others, right? Generally speaking, the platform that we stand on in our approach to God is essentially all the good things that we've done and the bad things that we've avoided. Matthew is writing to an audience, and that's their whole approach to God. The problem with this is that many people in his culture, including Matthew himself, and many people in our culture know that if my approach to God is based on my personal righteousness and my consistency in living a good life, then I'm never going to have any kind of a relationship with God. I'm never going to have peace with God. There's always going to be conflict. And I'm never going to feel good enough for God. And Matthew knows that he's about to launch into the greatest story ever told. It's a story where God is going to reiterate something that has been true all along. That humanity has been invited to approach God on a relational level. And the foundation of that relationship is not what they have done and haven't done. The foundation of that relationship is what God has done on our behalf. Specifically in Matthew's story, he gets to tell the story of God sending his son into the world to be the Savior. Not simply of the Jews, and not of good people, but of all people, all time. So that we would be able to approach God based not on what we've done, but what God has done for us. And what God has done for me specifically through sending his son, Jesus Christ. This right here is an approach based on works, what I've done, my effort. This is an approach based on forgiveness and mercy and grace, what he did. So as Matthew traces the lineage of Jesus, he underscores the fact that all along, not simply in the New Testament, but all along, God has distributed his grace and his mercy to people who have never even deserved it. The reason they're a part of the story is that they're the point of the story. The reason you're a part of the story, in spite of what you've done and haven't done, is because you too are the point of the story of Christmas. So to his Jewish audience, he begins saying, remember, all along God has chosen unworthy people. All along, God has chosen sinners. All along, God has chosen and used lawbreakers because he is a God of grace and mercy and forgiveness. And so here's how he begins the story in Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. We've read this. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Right? You remember last week? Because Matthew pauses there. And you know, last week I said something about this happening. I think I said it happened 2,000 years ago. It's actually 2000 BC. So for all of you Bible and math and history scholars and everything, that was a mistake. I got that wrong. It was actually about 1800 BC that the story of Judah took place. All right. Matthew, verse 3. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, who was the mother of Tamar, and we talked about her, right? Perez, the father of Hezron, Hezron, the father of Ram. And what a great, isn't that a pretty cool name? Ram, Ram Tough, you know, that was a pretty cool name, I think. Ram, the father of Amminadab, which is not so much a great name, kind of weird. The father of Amminadab, the father of Nahshon, Nahshon, the father of Solomon, Solomon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Right? Now, for the Jewish audience, when you get to the name of Rahab, they go, Because Rahab had a label, didn't she? In fact, in the story of Rahab in the Old Testament, she gets a label. Now, this isn't unusual. Throughout the Bible, people have labels or nicknames. Let's see if you guys can fill in some of the blanks. There is John the Baptist, good. Thursday, this week, Christmas Eve, we're going to study, and this is a tough one, Uriah the Hittite. Okay. How about Alexander the Great? Yeah. Attila the Conan the. Yeah, that was in the Bible. What do you guys think? Buffy the Vampire. Yeah. And my favorite, Jabba the Hutt. Right. Okay. So anyway, throughout history and in fiction, it's not uncommon for people to have a word associated with their name to describe them. And unfortunately for Rahab, especially if you grew up in the world of King James, she is known as Rahab the harlot. Rahab the harlot. Now this creates some tension in the genealogy of Jesus. Rahab the harlot? Are you kidding me? And Rahab, as we are going to discover, wasn't even Jewish. She was a Canaanite. She was the enemy. She was the group that God sent Israel in to move out of that part of the world so that they could establish Israel. What would become eventually Israel? Which would essentially become the kingdom of David, right? He ruled over it. Right in the middle of the story of Jesus, just as we launched the Christmas story, there's Rahab the harlot. And it creates tension in the story because God's law was clear, especially when God gave the law to Moses. He said, you can't have any of this in your midst. And there's some harsh punishment for women who play the harlot. That's the terminology they used, who played the harlot. We saw that last week. So, oh my gosh, now we've got a harlot right in the middle of the Christmas story. And she's, Rahab the harlot. And Matthew could have skipped over her. He could have just stuck with the guys' names, but he puts the brake on for just a minute to remind his audience, his original Jewish audience, us, his audience for generations to come, that in the midst of the story, the outset of this incredible story of grace and mercy and forgiveness, in the lineage of Jesus, is a woman whose reputation is tainted throughout her life, Rahab the harlot. Why? Why would he draw our attention to her? Because she's part of the story. She's the point of the story. This is the context for the story that Matthew is about to tell us. Let me read some of her story to you guys. And if you want to follow along, this is in the book of Joshua. We're going to do a little bit in Joshua chapter 2, and then a few verses from Joshua chapter 6. So if you want to follow along, mark those two, okay? And while you're looking, I'm going to give you a little heads up about the story. Here is where Rahab shows up in our story. Israel is a brand new nation. The Hebrews have just left Egypt, and they were basically slave people, right? All they've known is slavery. And now they're free from Egypt, and they're coming into this land that God has promised them. It was the land that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob used to live in until they ended up in Egypt because Joseph saved them from the famine. Remember, we talked about that story? So now they're basically going home. But whereas earlier there were a handful of them, now, according to some estimates, there are about 2 to 3 million of them coming back home and back into what was called the Promised Land. Well, they crossed the Jordan River and they're about to move through an area that is controlled by the city of Jericho. And so Joshua, who is the leader following Moses, sends a couple of guys to Jericho to find out what they were up against. Because we're going to conquer this city, and they're going to conquer city after city after city as they kind of retake this land back that God had promised for them. And these two men, they arrive in Jericho, and they sneak into the city, and they scout out the city, right? They look to see what's going on there, what they're up against. But they're spotted. They're seen. And the men that spot them go to the king and say, "King, we think there are two Hebrews amongst us." And the king says, "Well, go find them. Don't let them roam around here." And so they begin to search for these men, and the sun begins to set, and they were seen ducking into a house that was right on the wall of Jericho. And it happened to be the home of Rahab the harlot. Well, the Bible doesn't tell us exactly, but we know from what the Bible does say that the guards, instead of barging into her home to arrest these two Hebrews, they knock on the door politely. My guess is because you never want to barge into the home of someone like Rahab the harlot, right? You don't know what you might see when you get in there, but that's just my guess. I don't know. But you got to wonder why they didn't really just barge in and tear the door down and go right in. But they knock on the door, and Rahab comes out, and they say, "Have you seen two Hebrews? We heard they were in your home." And she said, "Yes. They were here, but they left just after sundown, just before the gates of the city were locked." You see, every night in these cities, they would close and lock the gates. And if you showed up after dark in that culture, you got to spend the night outside of the city. And she says to these guards, "If you round up the posse and if you go look for these guys, I think you'll be able to track them down." And so they leave, and they go out around the city, and they begin looking for these two spies. Meanwhile, she goes upstairs and has a conversation with these two Hebrew spies. And that's where we're going to pick up our story in the text. Joshua chapter 2, verse 8. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up to the roof. And the Bible tells us how she hid them, and it's actually a pretty interesting story. Verse 9, and she said to them, "I know that the Lord has given this land to you." And the translation is of the Hebrew name for God. That's translated Lord in my Bible. It's the Hebrew word that was very rarely used for God, because it was a special word, the word Lord. Some Jewish readers and some Jewish people would not even speak the word. It was only written. It was the most sacred name for God. Now, why don't we know what language the spies and Rahab, we don't know what language the spies and Rahab communicated in. We don't know if there was a translator, right? We don't know how that happened, but when this text was written, the name that they chose to describe God, to reflect what Rahab said, was essentially the highest name for God. It literally meant the existing one. It was the name above all names. It wasn't a descriptive name. It was just the existing one. She said that we believe God. However you view God, as big as you can think God might be, we believe that God is the God of all gods. He's the God of all these little gods that I have up on this here in my household. They have these little statues and everything, right? Of different gods. And she's saying, your God is the God of everything. And she says, and he's the God of my ancestors, and my ancestors are worshiping him. We believe that God has given you this land. Verse 9. She said to them, I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord, and again, she uses that very important descriptive word for God. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did in Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted, and everyone's courage failed because of you. And now she uses an interesting combination of words. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Because the Lord your God, two different words for God, for the great existing one, who is the ruler, is literally what she said, we believe is the God of heaven and earth. She says, I believe it in spite of what I have been taught. I believe in spite of what I've seen other people do. I believe that your God, whoever your God is the God who reigns and rules over my household of gods, over our Canaanite gods, over anything I've known about God before this time. So there's this amazing sense of faith from her. Just based on what she's heard, the very little bit she's heard about God. That very little content, but this great amount of faith. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare my family, that you will spare the lives of my father and my mother and my brothers and sisters, all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Our lives for your lives, the men assured her. So they said, okay, because you've saved our lives, we're going to save your life and your family's life. Verse 14. If you don't tell what we're doing, you don't snitch on us, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us this land. So she let them down by a rope out of the window. The house that you remember she lived on was part of the city wall. So she essentially says, I don't know anything about your God. In fact, I'm not even sure what the name of your God is, but I'm telling you, we think your God, and I think, and my family for sure thinks that your God is the God. Your God is God. And they say, we will rescue you and save your life when we take this city because of your kindness to us. Then, after I guess they gave time for the posse to kind of get out and disperse, she lets them down through the window, gives them specific directions on how to avoid being caught, and they eventually make their way back to Joshua. And when they meet with Joshua, they report to Joshua what everyone in the city of Jericho and the fact that they are scared to death of them. This is going to be easy, right? In fact, they may just open the gates up by the time they show up and say, we give up. They're so scared. Now, what happens next is a bit of Bible history that perhaps many or most of you heard at some point in your life. It's the story of the Battle of Jericho. In fact, there was a little song about it, right? You guys remember that? Yeah, I'm not going to sing it, but we'll get Lita up here in a minute and she'll sing it out for us. Perhaps you saw it on a flannel graph. Remember those? Maybe you heard it in children's church. Your parents maybe told you the story. You had a little Bible book or whatever it is, but you remember this story. It was so unusual. The generals all met with Joshua, and Joshua said, okay, here's the plan, and it's a bit unusual. You will not need your weapons for the first 7 days. You're just going to need your sneakers, right? Because we are just going to do a lot of walking. That's what we're going to do. In fact, we're going to get the whole group together, and there's about 2.5 million Israelites, and we don't know how many of them are men. We don't know how many of them are actually soldiers, but the guess is probably several 100,000 people are soldiers there. And we're just going to walk around the city walls the first day, and that's it. And then we're going to walk around one more time on the second day. And we're going to do this all week long. Then on the seventh day, we are going to walk around 7 times, and then we're going to shout. Any questions, guys? And I guess they're all just like, okay, is this a parade or what? I thought we were going to take the city, but a parade sounds fine to me. Anyway, so that was the plan. And the plan was to be done in such a way that God would get credit for this victory, and that the people of Jericho and the people of the surrounding nations would know, in fact, that Rahab was right. This is the real deal God, who has shown up in the land of Canaan, bringing these Israelite people back to their home. So sure enough, they march around the city once, twice, all week long. The 7th day, 7 times, and the wall just collapses on itself. Now, what's really interesting when you read what believing and non-believing scholars say about this story is that there are all kinds of theories about why the walls fell. Right? One is that when they shouted, the sound reverberated against the walls. Maybe one was that there were so many Israelites that by the time that many people marched around that area, that they basically eroded the ground around the wall, the foundation of the wall. But who knows, other than we know that God was involved. God did it. At the end of the day, the wall collapses and chaos ensues. The people of Jericho are scared to death. The people of Israel, basically, they take everything. And in the midst of all this chaos and terror and bloodshed and stuff that we can't even relate to here in our modern thinking and modern era, in the midst of all that, God reaches in and spares one family because of the faith of one Canaanite prostitute. Here's how the story ends up over in chapter 6, Joshua 6, verse 22, if you follow along. This is after they have taken the city, everything has settled down. Joshua fulfills the promise that his man made to Rahab. Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her in accordance with your oath to her." Skip down to verse 25. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies in Jericho. And then I love this last phrase, because this puts this story in a spot of history. This is, and they all lived happily ever after, like fairy tale kind of ending. But listen to this last phrase. And she lives among the Israelites to this day. And she lives among the Israelites to this very day. And she lives among the Israelites as a picture of, as an illustration of something that was still foreign to the way of their thinking. That God is a God still of mercy and of grace, who would even spare a foreigner, an outsider, an enemy, and someone who, by their very law, should have been judged and not allowed to even live among them. And Rahab and her family live among the Israelites, the storyteller tells us, to this very day. Now see, when the first century Jewish people, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later, are reading the genealogy of Jesus written by Matthew, the genealogy that describes where Jesus came from, they know this story, and it stands out as such an aberration to holiness, an aberration to the law, an aberration to all that should be. Why? Because that's the point of the story that Matthew is going to tell. What the Bible doesn't tell us is that one day Rahab is doing her chores or doing her thing as the nation of Israel continues to move along through the land, and a man named Solomon walks up to her one day and says, "Hey, maybe we should have coffee." Right? And they have dinner. And then one thing leads to another, and they fall in love. And Solomon says, "I'd like to marry you. And would you like to marry me?" And the Jewish man marries this Canaanite woman, and they have a little baby. and they say, let's name him Boaz. I don't know why they named him the name Boaz. Boaz grew up, and when he was an old man, he was introduced to a young woman named Ruth. And she has a whole book in the Bible that tells her story. He marries Ruth, and they have a baby. And Boaz and Ruth's great-grandson is actually King David himself. And you see, Matthew pauses and brings all that to the memory of his readers, because he knew this story. The story of Rahab illustrates the entire story and message of Jesus. Here was this woman that was condemned by the law of Moses, that the ink hadn't even dried. It was stone, right? So the dust hadn't even been blown off the stone yet. The law of Moses is brand new. And according to the law of Moses, she is an outcast, an outsider, an enemy. She can't be allowed to live among them. Here's an outsider, an enemy, a lawbreaker in a time when life was ruled by law. And God says that in spite of my law, my grace is broader than my law. That my mercy is broader than my judgment. That my love and my sense of forgiveness can incorporate and encompass all that I've said is right or wrong. And even though she's guilty because of her lifestyle, and even though she's an outsider because of where she was born, still, God says, my grace and my love and my mercy are large enough and broad enough, not only to incorporate Rahab and to save her life, but to incorporate into her lineage and to be incorporated into the lineage of Jesus Christ. That is absolutely incredible, isn't it? It is the perfect illustration of who God is. But you know what? I don't think her story is so far away from our story. Because just as she had a label, Rahab the harlot, I think if I were able to peel back your heart and to see your thoughts and to study your behavior, your private behavior, your public behavior, your past behavior, and things about you that you don't want anyone to know, I think the truth is probably all of us have a label, don't we? Some of you have labels that have just been discovered, and you're so humiliated by it. In fact, it may be why you go to church, or it may be why you don't go to church. Some of you have labels that you've tried to distance yourself from, but every once in a while you meet someone from the past and they say, oh yeah, I remember you. You're the... And you remember that in their minds, you have a label. For some of you, you have a label in the mind of, of your ex. And you wish you could go back and undo what you've done, but you can't go back and undo it. Some of us have labels because we have secrets. Some of us have labels because we have habits. But as easy as it is to look at somebody like Rahab the harlot and go, oh, that is really, wow, whew, that's a tough one. The truth is, in some ways, her story isn't much different from ours. Because like Rahab, when you think about God, approaching God, as soon as you start to step up to God, here's what I want you to do for me, and here's why. Maybe the first thing that comes to mind is your label. And suddenly you back off God, and you realize there is no reason for God to take me seriously, not with this label. There's no reason for me to try to become a church person. There's no point for me to even try to engage in spiritual activity because I have a label. It's a secret label, but it's a label that's true nonetheless. I actually made a list of some labels. Maybe these can describe someone. Carrie the coveter, Grace the greedy, Gary the glutton, Larry the luster, Cherry the cheater, James the jerk, Sam the swindler, Adam the addict, Barry the abuser, Jeannie the jealous, Faith the unfaithful. And do you know what I think? Again, I'm guessing. But Matthew, he's doing this whole genealogy. He gets to the whole Boaz, the Solomon Rahab thing. And again, he just has to throw her name in there. Rahab the harlot. And perhaps, maybe, it's because Matthew had a label as well. We know he did. It was Matthew the tax collector. All right, when people think of Matthew, Matthew the tax collector, who was caught, by the way. Remember the first week we talked, he was caught red-handed doing that thing that embarrassed him the most in his Jewish community, collecting taxes. And he remembered that Jesus walked up to him, eyeball to eyeball. There it is, Matthew the tax collector. I mean, he had a label and a badge. And Jesus looked at Matthew the tax collector, and he didn't say, Matthew, once you quit being a tax collector, then come join me. Matthew, I want you to lay it down and promise you'll never do it again. And once you have repented of your tax collecting, I want you then to come follow me. And once you, Matthew, once you get a different label, a different badge, and once you have a different reputation, Matthew, then I want you to follow me. Yeah. Matthew remembered that day when Jesus looked at him right in the eyeball with his label already there, caught in the act, and he said, Matthew, I want you to follow me. Matthew, I want you to join me. And Matthew knows he's about to tell us the story of Jesus. Jesus who invited all kinds of people with all kinds of labels to follow and believe in him while they were still wearing their labels. Because his righteousness, God's righteousness, did not overshadow his mercy. And his holiness would never overshadow his grace. And God's sense of forgiveness was broad enough to incorporate and to encompass everyone, regardless of their label. And so Rahab the harlot would be enabled, would be given the opportunity. Rahab the harlot would be able to become the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother of Jesus the Christ. Which is the point of the story. Isn't that powerful? Isn't that a bit overwhelming? I mean, doesn't it move you? That's my agenda. We talked about that the first week throughout this whole Christmas series. Doesn't it move you to begin rethinking your approach to God? To begin rethinking maybe, in fact, it's not about God since I now must, or since I, hoping you will, or since God, I've been to church 3 weeks in a row now, God, didn't you notice that? I was there. And okay, I would go next week, but I 4 out of 5 ain't bad. God, I'm going to negotiate with you, and I'm going to begin to bargain with you, and I'm going to remind you of all the good things I did, God. I gave, remember, I gave. And isn't it perhaps true that this whole way of thinking needs to be abandoned? Because the message of Christmas is God has done for you what you could not do for yourself. And you have been invited, while you're still wearing your label, you have been invited to lean into God who is leaning into you right now. You've been invited to approach the God who has approached you during this Christmas season to say, I want to begin a relationship with you, God, even while I'm still wearing this crazy label. And God's saying, I want that relationship with you. I don't care about that label. I want you to get rid of it, but with me, not before me. I would invite you into a relationship based not on what you have or haven't done, but in spite of, and it's in spite of your label. I want to invite you into a relationship based purely on what God has done for you. A relationship characterized by grace and mercy and forgiveness. And you say, John, could that even be true? Absolutely. It's the point of the story. And Matthew, before he even gets to the Jesus part, wants us to know that this has been God's agenda all along. It's not new. It's just a new chapter and an age-old story that finally God decided to pay for the sins of those in the Old and the New Testament, pay for the sins of all mankind once and for all, regardless of the label that they're wearing. And then, and don't miss this, God wants to invite us into a relationship with him. And once that relationship has begun, then he wants to begin chipping away at all those things that we don't want in our life. We don't want them anyways. But that's not in order to begin a relationship. It's a result of being in a relationship with God. Now I'm going to ask you a tough question. But we're in church, and I want you to be incredibly transparent, honest this evening. If you're listening online with this message, you can't tell, but I still want you to participate. And if you would say, you know what, John, you're right. If people could peel back my heart and my thoughts and my life, I might have a word or two associated with my name. You would be honest enough to say, you know what, there are people in my vicinity that when they talk about me behind my back, I know they're talking about that label associated with my name. Some of them I've earned. It's true. There are things in my past, and when I see those people from my past, I know in their minds there's no label associated with my name, and I can't do anything about it. I wish I could. John, if you just knew what I do week in and week out that no one knows about, yeah, there'd be a label. John, if you knew the thoughts that run through my mind when I see certain people, if you could see the jealousy that runs through my heart when I'm around certain people, if you only knew how much I covet my sister, my sister-in-law, brother and brother-in-law, what they have, yeah, John, those labels would be true. From God's perspective, there's probably a label associated with my name. And this is going to take some bravery. But would you raise your hand if that's the case? You have a label associated with your name? I know I do. And we look around and we say, what a mess we are. Right? Now here's how I want to close our service. I want you to lead us all in prayer. And if this is new to people watching online or new to you, if you're just like, man, I barely even read the Bible, I know about this, whatever. If it's way out of your comfort zone, feel free to just sit this one out. The last thing I want is for anyone to do something that they don't feel good about. But I want to lead most of us in prayer. And let me tell you who this prayer is aimed at. This prayer is aimed at those of you who grew up here. You may be a Christian, you may be a non-Christian, but you grew up with a sense of, if I don't, then God won't. I'm trying to convince God of this. And you're sort of in this negotiation with God. And you have come to this place because of maybe this series. Or you come to this place where you're ready just to quit. You're done doing it. You're ready to abandon the way of thinking of the only way I can get to God is by what I can do. And then you're able to come ready to now say, from now on, I want to learn to approach God from the standpoint of grace and mercy and forgiveness. And yes, my life is not perfect. I've got a lot to change. But I'm not even going to factor that in anymore. I really want to make that swap from this thought to this thought. You're the group that I want to take that opportunity and to declare today about yourself what God says is true. Those of us have, you may have been a Christian for a long time. And this is something you kind of ping pong on back and forth. Sometimes you get it and sometimes you don't. Others of you have been living in this for years and years and years. I want all of us to declare out loud right now what God says is true of us in spite of our labels. So I'd like you just to repeat this prayer with me. So go ahead and bow your heads and we'll pray together. Heavenly Father, I believe your grace is more powerful than my label. I believe Christ died to pay for the sin my label represents. I believe you've offered me a new label. Forgiven, accepted, loved. Lord, teach me to live my life in accordance with who you say I am. Amen. All right, I will see all of you, I hope, in just a few days on Thursday, Christmas Eve, as we complete our series and we see how Velma and the crew end up and try to hopefully pull it all together. So we're going to take some time for those of us that are here to worship. And those of you that are online watching, thank you and love you, and we will see you on Thursday at 5 o'clock.